But we got to talk about UFC 246 tonight. McGregor, Cerrone, and it's actually a stacked card beside those guys too. You have former champions like Holm and Pettis on the card as well, and joining us live from Vegas, ESPN MMA reporter and insider Brett Okamoto has been doing a great job with the coverage all week long from Vegas. He joins us now on the Boardwalk on the hotline. Brett, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. I get to see Conor McGregor fight Donald Cerrone. It feels like we've been waiting for Conor to come back for a long time, and then this week has felt very long. So I'm ready. I'm ready to see a fight.
Before we get into the specifics about the fight card tonight, I just want to ask you about, what is the vibe been out there? Because you've covered a lot of MMA and boxing events out there in Vegas. That's your home turf. So talk about what has the vibe been like in the city this week?
I'll be honest with you, it hasn't been as high and as frenzied as previous fight weeks for McGregor, and I can only speculate on why that is. What I think is that Ireland they haven't given up on the guy. I think they're still very interested in him, and I think they'll forgive him for some of the things he's done over the last few years, but I think they want to see this as a little bit of a test, before they spend their money and they come back to Vegas. It's cold here, he's fighting Cowboy. Maybe if he beats Cowboy, he comes out, he looks like the old Conor. I think maybe we'll get that old, because that's really what makes a Conor McGregor fight week so different, is when Ireland comes over. And so if he does what he says he's going to do and he beats Cowboy and then he fights again, maybe this summer or a little later this year, maybe it's back in Vegas, I think we'll see that fan base again.
I was talking with somebody earlier this week, and I love your perspective, because you're not just covering the sport, you're also a historian of the sport as well. And that is, to me, Cerrone versus McGregor is more than just a great headline. It's more than just two big names. It also embodies like what people who love the sport, what brings them to watching these fights, which is, guy coming back, a guy who is always willing to fight like Cerrone. There's so much involved in these two fighters that I think embody what people love about the sport of MMA.
Yeah, and I think it's also about, look, on Cowboy's side, I think the storyline is a little more simple. It's this guy fights everybody all the time. I mean, literally to his detriment. There have been times where, like, Cowboy, take a break, and he just refuses to do it. This is just who he is, and now he gets a great opportunity to headline his first UFC pay-per-view, and he's enjoying it. With Conor, the story is a little bit more complex. I mean, this guy represents something that's very different to the sport. He reached a peak in his career in which I think he did kind of look around and say, okay, well, what's going to motivate me next? And the unmotivated Conor McGregor we saw, it was not a successful one, at least in terms of a competitive standpoint. So now I think that I would never say he's hit rock bottom at this point, but now he's sort of reshuffled the deck, and now there are things out there that definitely motivate him. So that's kind of what's intrigued me about this fight, is Conor McGregor really, really, truly motivated again to not just win this fight, but then to go on to bigger and better things this year. He says he is, and we'll know. We'll know when he gets in there with Cowboy.
You had an excellent sit-down interview with Donald Cerrone. People who haven't seen it, they can check out the link on your Twitter account at @BOkamotoESPN. And I felt like it was great to see a side of Donald that I don't think a lot of fans have always had the chance to see, because maybe they haven't been to one of his fights, or maybe they've never had a chance to meet him. I felt it was a great opportunity to see that Donald is a guy who, as he's getting older, he's becoming much more shall I say, comfortable with who he is and where he stands in the world. Whereas maybe, back in like the WEC, for example, he was a little bit more like, hey, I'm just here to have fun. And then he would just, do his thing. Whereas I feel like now, because he's a father, because he's so experienced in the game, he's more of a veteran, he's really embracing who he is, not just as a fighter, but as a person.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and I think you're right in that it sounds weird to someone like myself who is so invested in the sport and is always around the sport that people need to figure out and know and be introduced to Cowboy. It feels like everybody should know Cowboy. The guy fights almost every weekend. But when you're fighting a megastar like Conor McGregor, of course, there's a different set of eyeballs on you, and I think it has been fun to sort of inform these people about that this is Cowboy, and some guys have nicknames that don't really match up to who they are. No, Cowboy is a cowboy. He's a guy who has figured out life, I think. He enjoys himself. He doesn't put too much pressure on himself. In the past, earlier in his career when he was younger, I think he did put pressure on himself. He has had instances where he didn't show up to big fights, and that's still a question going into this one. But I got to tell you, being around him personally this week, it's impossible not to be happy for the guy because, as you mentioned, everything that you said is true. He's enjoying himself. He knows that this is a big moment. He's getting paid well for it. So it's been fun to watch him just enjoy the week.
What is the biggest key for you if we had to just strip away all of the hype and everything else going into this fight tonight? What is going to be the biggest key for you looking at McGregor versus Cerrone tonight?
Cowboy's ability to take the punch. Because I think Cowboy throughout his career has shown that he can get hit. His defense is not always on point. I mean, he's a veteran, so he understands the value in defense, but he doesn't always remember it. He gets in there and he gets tunnel vision. He wants to hit the guy. And if Conor McGregor goes out and puts on some big punches on him early, I mean, Conor McGregor is the type of guy you give him any momentum and he's just going to run with it. So I think it's important for Cowboy to be able to take that punch, to be able to extend the fight just a little bit, because once we're sort of out of the first 3-4 minutes, then it can turn into a fight. I think Cowboy wins this fight by turning it into a fight where he can force McGregor to make a mistake, where he can get him to the ground or he can trip him or Conor's off balance and then Conor makes some type of mistake and the Cowboy is the type of guy that just jumps on your back and chokes you out. If it looks like a technical boxing match out there, that is the type of fight the Cowboy is going to lose probably 9 times out of 10.
Brett Okamoto joining us, the Boardwalk on the hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you're following him on Twitter at @BOkamoto ESPN. He's out there in Las Vegas for McGregor versus Cerrone. You can catch it on pay-per-view ESPN Plus. This is a must-watch card. You got not one, not two, but 3 former champions on this main card tonight, Breton. The co-main event, Holly Holm versus Raquel Pennington. This is a rematch for those two. A great fight the first time, but very different circumstances. They're in 2 very different places than they were the last time they fought.
They are very different, but there is a similarity in that Holly Holm is kind of in a must-win situation. When she first fought Raquel Pennington, it was her first fight in the UFC, and she came in under a lot of expectations. She was a former boxing champion. Ronda Rousey was smoking through, all of her competition. So people looked at Holly immediately and said, we're expecting you to go and fight Ronda. You're the girl that we're interested in fighting Ronda. No one really thought that she would beat Ronda, and we all remember that crazy upset. But she had to get into the UFC and get her feet wet a little bit with one fight, and she needed to win that. Can you imagine if she had gone in and lost her first fight to Raquel Pennington? I mean, we wouldn't have seen that knockout of Ronda Rousey. Those were the circumstances that she came in under. Now, she's coming off of a loss to Amanda Nunes. She lost to Chris Cyborg a year ago as well. She's had her title opportunities. She hasn't won some of them since that win over Ronda. So she's in that position again where it's kind of like, hey, Holly, you got to win this fight. You got to win. You got to look good if you want to still be that woman who is considered in title contention, because right now she's simply not considered in title contention.
Also, I mentioned Anthony Pettis is on this card, and Pettis, he's in a very interesting situation. Since his featherweight debut, he's 3-4 in his last several fights since then. So, I mean, he's lost to guys. I mean, Nate Diaz, Tony Ferguson, Dustin Poirier, Max Holloway. I mean, these are great fighters. So it's not like he's losing the guys who are, pushovers. But I kind of have to wonder, Brett, where is Pettis' career at this point?
I mean, Pettis is still safe in that he's got a big name. I mean, anytime he's on a card, he's a name that you mentioned. I mean, it's easy for open for me when we're talking about a card to say, hey, there's former champions on this card. Anthony Pettis is one of them. Like, he's always going to have that. He's always going to have that name recognition. But to me, this fight tonight against Diego Ferreira, it's all about his level of motivation, because, like you said, he's fought a lot of big names. And he's lost to some of those big names. Diego Ferreira is not a big name. So what was that like for Anthony Pettis to go into camp and to try and get in shape and to try to be at his absolute best when he's fighting a guy who, quite frankly, is just he's a little bit of an unknown. Anthony Pettis has not fought an opponent with this lack of name recognition for a very long time. So he looks like he's in great shape. He said the right things. But we'll see. We'll see what he looks like in the cage, because I got to believe that this is a much harder fight to get up for than, when he was fighting Nate Diaz last summer.
One more, Brett, for you, and I appreciate your time here. I know you got a busy day out there in Vegas again. UFC 246 tonight in Las Vegas. Brett, if McGregor loses tonight, then what?
Well, I think I think he doesn't disappear, right? And he still has he still has a lot of people who are interested in seeing him fight, and I think he still has some fights out there that would, even though he would lose some stock, if he were to lose tonight, but then they were to announce a month from now that he's going to fight Nate Diaz in a trilogy, I think the whole world is still pretty excited about that, right? But then at that point, he's kind of going down a different path where now it's like, well, let's try to find some things that'll be interesting for Conor McGregor, whereas before we were always on this path of like, this dude could be great. I mean, he could be legitimately great, and he already has proved he's great. He's won titles in 2 weight classes, but the expectations and the potential in Conor McGregor were more than that. This was a guy who could go in and hold the belt for a long time and win more championships and really beat some of the best fighters of his generation. If he loses tonight, I think it doesn't mean that his career is over, but it kind of sends him on a different path of like, well, let's find events and let's find kind of fun fights for Conor, instead of talking about him as like, hey, this guy could still be one of the absolute best fighters in the entire planet. Pound for pound, top 5. He had that potential, but if he loses tonight, I think the narrative kind of changes and we look at him in just a slightly different way.
Follow him on Twitter at Okamoto ESPN. Again, you want to check out it's over 30 minutes, but it's a well-quality 30 minutes. His sit-down with Donald Cerrone, a lot of great insights on the main event fighter tonight. Cerrone, McGregor, pay-per-view, ESPN+, and Okamoto, like all guests, joined us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Brett, I appreciate you making the time today.
You got it, Josh. Thanks, man.